he also serves as a co-chair for one of the largest lead cleanups the largest lead cleanup in California around the former Eastside facility. Mark earned his bachelor's degree in environmental studies from UC Santa Cruz and his master's from the Chicano Studies Department at Cal State Northridge. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mark Lopez, as our key speaker today. Welcome, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Andres. Before anything, just want to make sure to acknowledge the First Peoples from where I'm at here on the east side, which are the Tongva, Quiche, Gabrieleno peoples. Yeah, it's really good to see some familiar faces, some friends up in here, or at least some familiar names, because there's only a couple of you with the camera on. But I think what would be helpful for me is if y'all want to just kind of throw in the chat, like, where are y'all from? I'm not able to see it all, but I'll at least be able to catch some of it. So I know who I'm talking to, right? Are y'all from LA? Are y'all from other parts of California? Are you from other parts of the country? Are you in a government agency? Are you from a community organization? Are you just thinking about starting some stuff up? Are you a teacher? What are you, right? Just so I could get a good sense of that. But yeah, as Andres mentioned, you know, my family came to LA in the early 50s. And there was a lot of racial formation of LA prior to us arriving in Los Angeles, right? Some of that is the colonial history that continues to be the foundation of what exists in Los Angeles today. Some of it involves formation around the multiple wars, right, over the decades that generates a particular formation around Los Angeles. Some of it is redlining, right, that determines, you know, in particular for my family, where we're able to live when we come to Los Angeles, right? The east side is kind of where we can go. And then there's, you know, industrialization, post-industrialization, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and a whole other, you know, a whole bunch of other periods of time that really generate my community today. You know, I've had the blessing to be able to live on the east side with my parents, with my grandparents. There's currently 4 generations of my family here on the east side, including my daughters. And so I get to hear those stories, right? I would drive around with my grandparents and they would say, you know, before the 101 freeway was here, when this was just a street, right? Or my mom would say, oh, we used to live right here, as we drove over what is no longer a home, what is now the 3rd lane of the 5 freeway, right? And my family was moved 3 times. We were displaced 3 times because of freeway construction, the 5 freeway, the 60 freeway, and the East LA interchange. So those homes no longer exist. And that's a story that's familiar for a lot of families on the east side and families that no longer live on the east side because they were displaced out of the east side, right? And so it's important to kind of recognize those histories as part of the formative experience, right? And I want to make sure that as we're looking at, or as we're thinking about the deliberate kind of creation of our community with all its problems, right? And that's something we talk to our community members about today, right? Is all of this is a result of plans. None of this happened naturally, right? Lead, we're not magnets. We don't just attract heavy metals, you know, that isn't something that exists, right? Like brown skin doesn't, you know, attract diesel particulate matter naturally. These are all things that are planned. And once we recognize that they're planned, then we can shift to changing the plans, right? That is a big part of what we do as a community, is to start to generate the sense that we can determine our own futures, right? And in fact, the only way we can generate healthy lives, healthy communities is by fighting for self-determination of our communities, right? Because for so long, government agencies determine what happens in our communities, industries determine what happens in our communities, the real estate as an industry determines what happens with our communities, right? And so that's a big part of our work, right? And so I think it, along with recognizing the issues that we still currently face to this day, it's also important to recognize that there's tons of shit that doesn't exist in our communities because our communities fought back, right? There isn't an oil pipeline under Hollenbeck Middle School in Boyle Heights right now with kids in class over it because our communities fought back, right? There isn't a toxic waste incinerator nestled between the Eastside and South Central because our communities fought back, right? The 710 freeway hasn't displaced hundreds of homes in our communities because we fought back, right? And of course, the Eastside facility isn't currently spewing lead into our communities because we fought back, right? And so it's important to recognize what has generated the situation we're in now. But for our communities, we want to understand that to generate change, right? And so I'm very thankful for all of y'all that are attending today, because you're communicating that you want to have an understanding. And it's my belief that if you understand what has happened to our communities, you will be compelled to be part of generating that change, right? And so again, just want to thank y'all for coming through, and definitely looking forward to the questions that you all have, and Andres kind of facilitating that process.
Yeah, thanks for that opening talk, Mark. I really appreciate you kind of laying the groundwork for us to hear kind of what it looks like, and then just in some responses to your question about where people are from. We get people all over Northern California, Southern California. We have folks from Boyle Heights. We got folks from we got Highland Park, Canada, South Carolina. This is really fantastic that we have such a good mix, and a good mix from folks from agency as well. One of the first questions that I'd like to propose to you, and at this point, as Mark is answering some of these questions, I'll be moderating the chat. So go ahead and feel free if you'd like to again place a question in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand to interact with Mark as well. But I wanted to touch on this concept of the presence of exposure for multiple generations, like you had mentioned, and then how the community has effectively approached these injustices to the point where there's actually things being accomplished or done. So what do you see as effective community education strategies that assist with providing the information and knowledge on environmental issues that directly affect their health? Again, considering that you have a large swath of generations in your area, primarily Latino Mexican descent, but very different levels of education, interest, and understanding. So what have you seen in your experiences as good education strategies?
Yeah, I would say that the number one strategy would probably be persistence. Just generally speaking, our communities are constantly being targeted by folks looking to take advantage of our communities. And so not a week goes by that I'm not getting mail about somebody wanting to buy my house cash, right? I'm constantly getting calls about like my car warranty like expiring, even though my car is like a decade old. Whenever I'm at my grandparents' house, like their phone is off the hook with all these telemarketers and other folks that are trying to get their personal information. And then of course, there is some recognition of the kind of issues generated by government agencies over the years, right? And so there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of skepticism in our communities, and rightfully so, right? And so if you come to them wanting to engage them in something, they may, who the hell are you? You know? And so it definitely needs to go, especially for government agencies in particular, it needs to go beyond the minimum, right? Thinking right now about some of the Eastside cleanup that's happening, and I went to walk around a large housing complex called Wyvernwood, and the vast majority of people have no idea that cleanup is actively happening outside their home right now, right? The only postings out, the only information available is over some of the mailboxes, you know, right next to the "my cat is missing" like pages, right? Folks are thinking, oh, they're out here fixing the water sprinklers, right? Like, not, they're removing 18 inches of contaminated toxic soil. And so I think, and this is something that I've seen with multiple government agencies currently, the school my daughter is at right now, my daughters are at right now, where there is like a directive, right? There's regulation, there's policy, there's operational norms around what you do. And oftentimes what I see is agency staff use that as I can't do anything more than this. When the way we see it is, that's the bare minimum you have to do, right? There is no policy that says you can't do more, right? Though I understand there's often issues with funding, right? How many billable hours does this project have, and so on and so forth. And so I think that's where the ability to partner with communities, right? When infrastructure exists already, and it's harder when community infrastructure doesn't exist, right? But oftentimes it's going to be community members who are going to be present in communities for generations, right? Compared to oftentimes what we see with agency staff is folks are there, you know, 2 to 5 years before they transition to another agency, or before they transition into another position, and then we're dealing with new community engagement staff, right? And so that persistence that can be present when a community is active is what generates trust, right? And so I definitely have had those experiences where I'll go and knock on somebody's door and they're not trying to talk to me, right? Like they like look out the window and then close it, right? But then next month I knock on their door again, and next month I knock on their door again, and next year I knock on their door again, and next year I knock on their door again, to the point where they're just like, okay, who is this fool? Like, they just keep coming. What do you got, right? They'll crack the door open. I'll just drop it in my mailbox. Cool, drop the info, keep coming back, to the point where they're like, all right, obviously, like, you're here, you're from here, like, you're wearing this shirt that's from something I don't recognize, but you're not wearing like a county tag or something. Who are you? What are you doing, right? And that opening allows us to begin the conversation, right? And oftentimes the perception from community is they're going to do whatever they want to do, right? Them being the companies, them being the government entities, they're going to do whatever they want to do. And so going back to kind of the opening comments, right? Yeah, that's true. The companies are going to do whatever they want to do. The government agencies are going to do whatever they want to do, up to the point that we change what they can do, right? And that requires us to fight back. And so I think persistence is huge. And so for government agencies, you know, definitely look at the potential for partnership with communities, existing community infrastructure, to be able to kind of amplify whatever it is you're working on.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. I'll go down to a couple of questions that were placed in the chat, and I'll just go by questions and when they were submitted. By Richard, what organizations would you want to give a shout out to in LA that are doing the hard environmental social justice work?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of folks from community-based organizations to unions to churches to pop-up groups of friends to PTAs to there's a whole number a whole bunch of folks, right? I don't want to shout anybody out in particular because I also don't want to leave out any names, but I will say that here in LA, because LA is huge, it's so huge, and the communities are very much a lot of it because of redlining are very much segregated or kind of compartmentalized, and so there's definitely groups all over the place. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then another comment that that South Los Angeles is no longer referred to as South Central because it's another connotation. It's now South LA or South Los Angeles.
Definitely, totally understand that. I'm aware of that. There's also a lot of folks who will say, nah, who are like, I'm born and raised here, I'm multiple generations here, and I don't agree with that for multiple reasons. But that feels to me like more of an internal conversations that should be and are being had with that community in particular. But the folks who I know personally are like, no, like don't call it that, call it this. So I'm kind of, those are my primary relationships. And so that's what I'm accountable to, I think, the most. But I'm definitely open, or just won't say a name to make sure I'm not disrespecting anybody.
No, it's all good. Thank you, Mark. It's good to identify the diverse understanding of how folks identify themselves with. So, another question: how recently has your community had to fight back to prevent something bad from being cited in your community? I'm assuming like maybe a facility. Do you still have to fight to prevent these things from happening, or are the powers that be proactively avoiding citing those types of things in communities of color? So, presence of sites, your activity, and do you still have to fight those things off currently?
Yeah, what's interesting is, in particular for the Eastside, so my grandparents helped found an organization that's called the Mothers of East LA, Santa Isabel. And so some of the stuff I named earlier about that doesn't exist because our communities fought back are some of those things that they fought against. So I grew up in the movement, right? Like my grandma's was one of my primary caretakers. I was always at her house. And so I would go to meetings with her, with my mom, actions, whatever, right? But it felt like we reached a point where like corporations were like, don't go over there, don't mess with them, right? Like there was kind of this reputation. My grandpa was telling me a story that there was a community in like Cuernavaca, Mexico, who a corporation from the US was going to site a facility down there, and they told them that they were connected to the Mothers of East LA, Santa Isabel, and so the company like decided not to go there, right? And somehow these people like met my grandparents in the US like years later, but they didn't actually know them, right? So they just kind of lied to be like, yeah, we're with them. But even that was something that was useful, right? So I think there was this reputation of like you can't fuck around with the East Side, right? I think the organization ceased to exist in the early 2000s, and I think there was actually a kind of a gap. But I think we're rebuilding that reputation of, don't mess around on the East Side, right? Don't mess around in Southeast LA. Don't mess around, in Long Beach, and other communities are also generating, those reputations of don't mess around over here. If you come over here, you come correct, right? And so I was just on a call maybe like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago where a company was like initiating conversations with community members because they want to start their like facility on the East Side in City Terrace. And so they're like, let us break everything down for you for how we operate, the precautions we take. Come visit one of our sites so you see how serious we are about complying with regulation. So to a certain extent, I don't want to say asking permission, but kind of seeking consent, right? And that wasn't necessarily happening before. So I think that's important.
Great, thanks, and thanks for that question in the chat, John. Let's see the other question with a preface with an example by Michael. You mentioned relocation and that you and many others have experienced due to freeway construction, and it made him think of the brownfields program along the Los Angeles River and those communities adjacent to it, and the downtown area, for the sake of revitalization and construction of high density and some what they consider affordable or low income housing units. How can we help to assure that these residents are treated fairly and equitably?
For sure. Yeah, we've actually been working on that for years now. We kind of tell folks the name of the organization is East Yard Communities. East Yard is a rail yard that's on the East Side and the City of Commerce. And the organization started with community members who live up against the rail yard, right? The rail yard got us onto the freeway because what's coming to the rail yard? A gang of trucks, right? The freeway took us to the ports, right? Because where are the trucks coming from? The ports, right? So starting to understand a kind of whole system of goods movement, right? But the freeway also got us into the river because Caltrans wanted to put all of the Edison power lines in the river. So we're like, if you're going to tear up the river, like, let's try to naturalize it in some ways. Let's make this an asset for our local community members, as opposed to just kind of a ditch, right? So we, along with some of our allies, gathered community members from East LA all the way to Long Beach to start to generate a vision. So we actually, as far as I know, generated the first vision for what should happen with the river. In particular, creating a better bike infrastructure so that folks in our communities can bike to the industrial zones in Vernon, in the City of Commerce, in Maywood, in Bell, because thousands of people who work in those industrial centers live in our communities. So let's create infrastructure for them to not have to drive, right? Now, years later, then there was interest in revitalizing the river, right? Then there was this interest in making the lower LA River maybe similar to the upper LA River. And that's where we're like, hold up. We've seen what's happened in the upper LA River, right? We've seen communities displaced up there. And so what we want to focus on is community stability. That's the way we framed it, right? It isn't just anti-gentrification. It's programmatic in that we're talking about policies so that folks aren't displaced, right? Renter protections. We're talking about support for local businesses because a lot of shops are mom and pop shops that don't even have a lease. They're kind of just doing month to month. We're talking about workforce development to make sure that folks in our communities, when we push for local hire on the river, can get these employment opportunities and contribute to the economic viability of our residents to stay in our communities, right? So we've been, we started with like, yo, why is everybody getting asthma and cancer? But all those things are connected to so much more. And so we've been fighting for these policies in the area for years now, to varying degrees of success, because we're talking about like 10 different jurisdictions on the lower LA River in particular. So it is hard to kind of manage that. But it is something that we are concerned about and are building community leadership and capacity around currently.
Cool. Thanks, Mark. We have a question from Fabi Lau. Fabi, if you'd like to unmute and ask Mark the question directly, go right ahead.
Hey, Fabi.
Oh, there. Can you see me? No, right?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, weird. Okay, sorry, Mark. The camera's not working today, I guess. But hey, great to see you. Well, my question is more related to youth. because I know that Easter does a really great job about engaging, youth, future generations. And, we're in a climate crisis, it's almost daunting. Like you have your two little ones, I have my little one. How do you have these conversations for the youth, the ones that are like in elementary school, and what can you do to start them on that path to getting involved as they get older? Because I mean, the youth is the one that's going to keep fighting the fight for us. So it's going to see if you can share some of the best practices, something you have done, that Easters has done to engage youth and to just basically show people how powerful the youth voice can be.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, youth organizing is one of my favorite things ever. I'm like get excited just thinking about it. For multiple reasons. One, youth aren't as jaded. They aren't as like things are never gonna change, because they're like, this shit just started for me. Like I want a lot to change, right? Also, the capacity of youth to like absorb but also contribute to the movement is amazing. Like you can see people's life trajectories change within a matter of 2 to 3 months, right? As their understanding, as their development is happening, it contributes to their outlook on their opportunities for what they're going to do for the rest of their life, right? I think youth are also tend to be like not apologetic about demanding a better life, and are often doing it not just for themselves, but for their siblings, for their parents, for their grandparents, and bring it home, right? Are engaging folks at home. And so all of this really makes youth, one of the, if not the most important aspect of our movement. And so, I've experienced that right for myself, as far as I was a little kid, just kind of always around, to becoming a preteen, a teen, into an adult in the movement, right? And seeing the importance of the investment in young folks. But, generally speaking, like if you want to impact the culture, right? You start with the youth, because youth are the future of that culture, right? Youth generate culture. And so you generate a new reality with youth, right? I think also connecting youth to the legacies of our movement, right? So they're part of something longer. This isn't just right now, hey, this one thing, but like folks have been fighting for our communities, and y'all have the opportunity to continue those fights, to actually see those victories manifest. Because oftentimes our movements, our campaigns are not, 2-month-long campaigns. When they are, damn, that's dope. But sometimes they're decades long, right? The 710 freeway with US EPA saying, yeah, it doesn't make sense to widen the freeway and knock down all these homes and add more, diesel particulate matter to the region. That takes 2 decades for that to happen. So you got to think about youth who initially got involved being whole ass adults with their own kids in this movement, all the way up to current high school students who contribute to and celebrate this victory, right? So it's intergenerational. And that's a big component, right? Because sometimes youth organizing is like, oh, we're going to engage the youth. And then there's just a drop off, like, this is just a youth program. We've seen that with government entities too. Cool, there's like a youth internship. Cool, but what's the pipeline for our folks? Not just a youth internship that they can take when, they're a senior in high school. What is the pipeline into these agencies for our young folks who are community experts, who are developing some technical expertise along the way? What is their opportunity to enter the agencies, right? And so probably the number one way that we reach youth is going straight into the classrooms, right? I was just thinking about Roosevelt High School, who earlier last week, I spoke to like a dozen teachers in one of the pathways at Roosevelt High School in in Boyle Heights. And a lot of these folks are from the community. And some of them went to Roosevelt, some of them went to other schools in the area, and are very passionate and want to connect the educational experiences that they're providing to the youth. They want to ground it in our community, right? And so I'm talking to them about a multitude of issues and how you can generate curriculum from persuasive speech in your English class to chemistry, right? Because it like these issues are across the board. And so one of our members, who is a teacher at Roosevelt, actually generated a curriculum around Eastside for his chemistry class. And some of the youth who have taken that class, right, are now members of the organization. You know, it's just one of them. I was just, we were doing some soil sampling together with our partners at USC like 2 weeks ago, right? And so this, all of this stuff is connected, right, as far as generating what's possible for the future. But I think one of the most powerful pieces is we're focused on fighting back, right? But we're focused primarily on capacitating folks, in particular youth, and we're focused on building community, because that's what generates possibility in the future. We don't know what the fights are to come. We don't know what the strategies in the future will be for our current fights, but our young folks, they will be the ones to take that leadership. They will be the ones to generate that, right? And so it's our responsibility to invest in them now so they can continue to kind of grow that moving forward.
Great, thanks for that response, Mark. So we have about 3 minutes left, and what I'm going to try to do is I think there are some questions that have some common threads in the chat that I'm going to try to link up with Gary, Laura, and Lorena's comment and questions. So Gary mentioned, special interests have limited what the regulations require. If we ask regulators for more, they encounter being sued. And in that, I think what ends up happening, I think you had touched on it before, is this idea of trust, right? What is the best way for community groups to develop, or for government agencies to begin developing trust with communities, aside from what you described, showing up every day and making sure that people are aware of what's happening. And for you personally, Mark, what advice would you give to someone from a government agency or any kind of regulatory agency before they interact with the communities in your area to try to start developing that trust again that potentially was not there? Because trust isn't just an agency thing, it's a government thing. Especially people of color, especially people in East Los Angeles, have a strong distrust of government. How can that trust begin to be redeveloped again?
Yeah, that's such an important question. I think for all of you all that are at government agencies right now, there's nobody who knows all the bullshit that's going on within your agency more than you, right? There's probably nobody who's more frustrated with your agency than you, right? But oftentimes when we're engaging as community members with agency staff get real defensive and they take things personal. And so oftentimes they're defending the agency, right? Had one situation at an Eastside cleanup site where one of our members who went through the state's workforce development program, has worked on the Eastside cleanup for years, is talking to an agency staff person about hypothetical issues that can happen at a home when there isn't appropriate oversight. And the agency staff is like, no, that doesn't happen. The data shows. And I'm just like, look, he's showing you so much grace. This isn't a hypothetical. He's telling you what he's been directed to do. He's telling you what violations he's witnessed, right? So be open to that, right? And so I think part of, developing good relationships with community members is to acknowledge there's issues here. There are issues within our agency, right? There are many of us that are trying to correct these issues. There's some of us who are trying to maintain the status quo. And those are things that we struggle with internally But what I'm trying to do is what's best for this community, which is what you're trying to do. I have my limitations, you have your limitations. Let's have genuine conversation about the best strategies for accomplishing what these communities need, right? Coming from that approach of like acknowledging that goes a long way, right? It lets us know that we can have a real conversation with you. Because if not, then we're looking at what game are you trying to run here, right? You're telling me something, but that's only half of the truth, right? Like it kind of starts to break down some of those barriers, right? Some of those walls, so that we could get to work. And oftentimes that's, you know, once we're able to do that and it's like, cool, we can work together, let's get to it. That's your limitation. How about this, right? This is an issue you're having. Have you thought about this? It's a funding issue. Let's advocate for more funding. It's a, you know, Andres just did a training with me for like 300 Eastside cleanup workers because of what's happening at the site. I've never seen an agency do that. Where we're doing this, talking about the racial formation of the Eastside and how we got to the Eastside campaign. So folks know they're not just, you know, bringing a tractor to a home to dig out some dirt, but they're working to correct a harm, a historical harm, right? All of those things change the dynamics of the relationships between communities and agencies.
Great, thanks. Thanks for that response, Mark. So we are scheduled to go back at 11:05, and I want to make sure that everyone has time to transition over. And I just want to thank everyone ahead of time, so that way we don't get kicked off, and I don't have an appropriate send off for everyone. What our facilitator Jackie will do is she will place the link for the main room for individuals to go back. So go ahead and click that link once that's on there, and that should get you back to the main conversation led by Kevin. So thank you, Mark. There are a couple of other questions on there that that we weren't able to answer, but again, in the spirit of trying to get everyone back onto the main room, we're going to send everyone off. Yeah, and then the final words would be. Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I was just gonna say, I'm gonna throw my email in the chat. So if you want to follow up, you know, definitely hit me up. If you're like, come talk to my unit, come talk to my university, come talk to my students, come talk wherever you're at, definitely hit me up.
Great, thank you, Mark. Yeah, and I challenge everyone within agencies to try to reach out and not just do the bare minimum, reach out to community members, interact with them, ask them what they need, and follow through. I hope everyone gains something very beneficial from this, and I hope everyone gains much more knowledge as we get back to the main room. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you being here.